Deji Banjo adjusted his Rolex as he stepped out of the black Mercedes G-Wagon, helping his new girlfriend, Cynthia, out of the car like a proud king unveiling his queen. The valet took the keys with reverence, already familiar with Deji's status in Lagos. He was the CEO of a rising fintech startup that had just crossed the 1 billion naira valuation mark. A man who 6 months ago finalized a divorce that left his friends congratulating him for escaping a boring marriage. His new life was about luxury, rooftop lounges, silk shirts, and champagne. Tonight's dinner at Caviar Sky was meant to flaunt his upgraded life. Cynthia, a slay queen from Abuja with flawless skin and a body that made heads turn, had just toasted to new beginnings when Deji's eyes caught something. His glass froze halfway to his lips. Just beyond the glass windows of the expensive restaurant, across the street near a busy suya spot, stood a heavily pregnant woman, sweat beading her forehead, hands covered in soapy water. She was wearing an oversized faded gown, tied low on her belly. She bent over plastic plates, scrubbing dishes in a white plastic basin. It was her. It was Tiwa, his ex-wife, 7 months pregnant. Deji's breath caught in his throat. His past, one he thought he had discarded like yesterday's paper, was now standing before him with swollen feet and a round belly. The world blurred around him. Cynthia kept talking about her designer shoes, but all he could hear was the sound of betrayal roaring back at him, like thunder rolling into a clear sky. Tiwa had once been the pride of his life, back when they lived in a modest 2-bedroom flat in Yaba, and she stayed up with him late into the night, drafting proposals, editing pitches, and praying fervently before every investor call. When he had nothing, she had been his everything. She cooked, cleaned, and believed in a future even he couldn't see. But as Deji rose in wealth and influence, Tiwa became too local for his new taste. He hated her rapper. Her cooking started to smell too native. Her words started to sound too humble. And so, when Cynthia came along, everything about Tiwa became replaceable. She was discarded with the same arrogance a man throws away a dusty shoe after buying a new one. He had left her with a simple settlement, just enough to pay rent for a year. No job, no help, no explanation. But now seeing her like this, pregnant, working in a buka at night, Deji felt something hot and sharp cut into his chest. Who was the father of the child? Was it his? His memory traveled back to the final month before the divorce, to the last time he touched her. She had cried in the dark that night, begging for him not to leave. He had mocked her tears and turned over. Was this the result? Regret, like a snake, coiled around his throat. He rose abruptly, knocking over his wine glass. Cynthia's laughter stopped. He didn't excuse himself. He just walked out of the restaurant, crossed the street, and stared at the woman he once called his wife. She didn't even look up. She was focused on her task, moving like the world didn't care about her pain. And maybe it didn't. But Deji cared now, maybe too late. Deji stood frozen by the roadside, the din of Lagos traffic and the perfume of grilled meat blending into a dizzying whirlwind around him. The sight of Tiwa, his ex-wife, bent over, washing dishes with swollen ankles and a belly that could only be carrying his child, smashed through his ego like a wrecking ball through glass. His lips trembled as he whispered her name, but the sound got lost in the noise. The woman who once helped him climb from rags to riches now stood across the street scrubbing leftover jollof rice off cheap plates. Deji felt something heavy press on his chest, guilt, perhaps, or the ghost of a conscience he thought he buried alongside his wedding ring. A few people walked past him, staring, whispering. Even the security guard from the restaurant shot him a glance that said, "So that's the woman you left?" Inside the restaurant, Cynthia was now peeking through the window, irritated and confused. Her man had just left her at a 5-star table, without explanation, staring at some random pregnant woman across the street. But Deji didn't care. The moment had cracked something open in him. His past wasn't just confronting him, it was exposing him. He crossed the road slowly, unsure of what to say. He could see the fatigue on Tiwa's face. The once radiant woman who loved him with all her heart was now reduced to a shadow of herself, soaked in sweat and humiliation. She didn't see him yet. She was focused on rinsing the last set of plates, unaware that the man who discarded her like a bad habit was now watching her in stunned silence. Deji wanted to speak, but his throat closed. What words could undo what had already been done? Tiwa finally looked up, sensing someone near her. Her eyes met Deji's. For a moment, time stopped. Not a single Danfo horn or loud music from the nearby pepper soup joint could penetrate the stillness between them. Her face didn't change. No anger, no tears, no begging. Just tiredness. Just silence. That silence screamed louder than any insult she could have hurled at him. She wiped her hand on a piece of ankara tied to her waist and went back to rinsing the tray. Deji took a small step forward, guilt gripping his spine like a noose. "Tiwa, is that my child?" he asked, his voice barely audible, almost choking on itself. She didn't answer immediately. She just kept working, scrubbing a stubborn stain like it held all her rage. After a long pause, she looked at him again and said calmly, "What does it matter now?" The words pierced deeper than a slap. Tiwa was not dramatic. She wasn't here to curse or cry. She had cried enough. When he left her, she spent nights on the floor, clutching a pillow and praying for death to be gentle. But when it didn't come, she rose and decided to survive. This child, this belly, was proof that she had moved forward without him. Maybe not upward, but definitely forward. "You left me with nothing," she said plainly, "but God left me with something." Deji staggered backward like her words were blows. He looked around, embarrassed. The buka owner, an older woman frying plantain, gave him a cold glare. He felt exposed, small and unwanted. In that moment, he realized that all his money, his flashy car, and his designer watch couldn't buy him the one thing he had lost forever: Tiwa's respect. Deji didn't remember how he got back to his car. His legs moved, but his mind stayed behind, buried in the muddy water near the buka, next to the soap suds clinging to Tiwa's skirt. Cynthia was standing by the car now, visibly annoyed. "What nonsense was that?" she asked, folding her arms. "Why were you staring at that dirty woman like she's some goddess?" Deji didn't respond. His silence was heavy, thicker than the night air. He got into the car, without a word, and for the first time, Cynthia didn't follow. She rolled her eyes and muttered, "You still love that village girl, don't you?" before turning and walking away, her heels clicking angrily into the night. But her words didn't sting. They were too late. Deji had already left the dinner in his heart. What haunted him now wasn't Cynthia's jealousy, but the haunting look in Tiwa's eyes, the same eyes that used to light up when she believed in him. Driving back to his Lekki apartment felt like navigating through a graveyard of memories. Every streetlight reminded him of a time Tiwa waited at the bus stop to bring him lunch. Every street corner whispered a memory of her laughter, her warmth, her dreams. He thought of her belly, round, full, defiant. Was that child his? Did she struggle to pay hospital bills? Did she eat enough? Did she cry herself to sleep? For the first time in months, he pulled over and wept. Not the silent tears of guilt, but full-throated sobs of a man who finally realized that success built on betrayal always rots from the inside. The money meant nothing. The house was cold, and the woman who once carried his dreams now carried his child in shame, in suffering, and alone. Tiwa closed up late that night, her back aching and her feet sore. The buka owner, Mama Ifyananya, offered to walk her partway home, but Tiwa insisted she was fine. She had grown used to the pain, physical, emotional, financial. Since the divorce, she had learned to breathe without complaining. Each day was a battle between exhaustion and resilience. The baby kicked often, as if reminding her that she wasn't alone. She whispered to her stomach, "We'll be fine, my child. Your mother may be scraping plates today, but one day you'll rise." She didn't know Deji had seen her. She didn't know her silence had shaken him more than 1,000 accusations ever could. She only knew she had to survive, because giving up wasn't an option when another life depended on her. She arrived at her small rented room in Surulere, where the ceiling leaked and mosquitoes danced freely. She lit a small candle, knelt by her mattress, and whispered a prayer. Not for revenge, not for Deji's downfall, but for strength. She asked God to keep the child healthy, to open a door, to dry her tears. And somewhere in that prayer a tear did fall, but not from sorrow. It was from hope. Even in her pain, Tiwa still carried hope like a crown no one could steal. She held her belly and smiled faintly. "You're my light, baby," she whispered. "Even if the world turned its back on us, I won't." That night she slept in peace, not because the world was kind, but because she had chosen not to let it break her. 3 days passed before Tiwa heard the knock. It was late, too late for a neighbor's visit, and far too quiet for the street kids, who usually made noise outside her compound. She pulled herself up slowly, adjusting the scarf tied over her head, her belly heavy against her thighs. When she opened the door, her heart dropped. It was Deji, standing there like a ghost who had remembered the address of the grave he dug with his own hands. He held a white nylon bag, rice, oil, baby wipes, and some prenatal supplements he must have Googled. Tiwa blinked, unimpressed. "You shouldn't be here," she said coldly, her voice flat like the peeling paint on the wall behind her. I needed to see you again. And check if you're okay," he mumbled, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The room was small, the air stale with heat. A single fan stood in the corner, clicking occasionally like it was protesting the burden of survival. Deji looked around and winced. This was where the woman who once inspired his ambitions now laid her head. She didn't even ask him to sit. She just watched him, still unreadable. He stood awkwardly in the middle of the room and said, "Is it mine?" Her laugh came out like a soft knife. "That's what you came to ask? Not how I eat. Not how I afford to see a doctor." Deji looked ashamed. "I was wrong. I was foolish. I thought Cynthia was what?" Tiwa snapped. "A trophy? Something shinier than the woman who washed your boxers and edited your CV at midnight." She sat down, breathing hard. The baby kicked. Deji knelt in front of her and whispered, "Please, let me make this right." But even he knew, some wrongs can't be undone, only endured. The next morning, Deji returned again. This time with a doctor. A private one. Female. Kind. She gave Tiwa a checkup right there in the room. Deji paid everything without blinking. He also handed over a small envelope, N200,000 cash. Tiwa refused it at first. "I'm not a beggar," she said. "I know," he replied gently, "but the baby needs what I never gave you." That made her pause. The baby. Not her. Not their marriage. The baby. Slowly, she took the envelope not as a gift, but as a debt he owed to a life that never asked for any of this. Deji began coming every 2 days, bringing fresh fruits, bottled water, clean clothes, and even a mattress. The neighbors started whispering. One woman said, "Now the man wait chaser comet. He day find comeback now." But Tiwa didn't care. She didn't take him back. She only took the help for the baby. Her walls were up, and she wasn't sure they'd ever come down again. Deji started confessing. One night, he sat beside her and wept. "I got drunk on money. Cynthia made me feel like I was above you, like you were dragging me down. But Tiwa, you were the one who held me together." Tiwa stared at the floor, silent. She remembered begging him to come to church, to eat, to talk. He never listened. And when he finally left, he did so without a backward glance. "I don't hate you," she said finally. "I just stopped needing you." Those words hit Deji like a slap. He wanted her to scream at him, to cry, to throw plates. But her calmness was worse. It meant she had truly let go. "Is there hope?" he asked, voice cracking. Tiwa looked at him, her hand resting on her belly. "Not for us, but maybe for you and your child." Deji nodded slowly, understanding the cost of betrayal was not always paid in loud arguments, but in silent doors that no longer open. Deji was trying. At least that's what he told himself. He visited daily, paid for the antenatal care, and even got Tiwa, a part-time nurse, to help with the chores. But Tiwa was firm. "You can be present for your child, Deji, but don't confuse that with earning me back." Her words were always calm but firm, like a judge reading a sentence. Deep down, he respected it. It was the version of her he had never allowed to grow in their marriage, the version that stood tall, without his approval. But his visits didn't go unnoticed. One afternoon, as he stepped out of her compound, he ran into Cynthia. She had followed him after seeing his driver park near Surulere. She was in her usual fitted jumpsuit, her makeup thick enough to mask any emotion, but her eyes flared with rage. "So this is where you've been coming?" she hissed. "To see that woman?" Deji didn't answer. Cynthia stormed closer. "You think I'm stupid? You lied to me. You told me she was irrelevant, that she was gone." Deji looked at her squarely. "She was never irrelevant. I just chose to be blind." Cynthia laughed bitterly. "So now that she's pregnant, you want to be a daddy again? What about us?" "There is no us, Cynthia," he said. "We were built on my betrayal. I see that now." The words made her jaw tighten, but he didn't flinch. He was done running. "Go home, Cynthia. This isn't your fight." She hissed and walked off, heels snapping like thunder across the pavement. Neighbors peeked from windows. Tiwa had watched from inside, unseen. She sat down slowly, heart pounding, not from Cynthia's presence, but from how far Deji had come. He was shedding his arrogance. But could a man change after breaking what mattered most? It happened on a humid Tuesday afternoon. The nurse was late. Mama Ifyinanya had traveled, and Tiwa had gone out to buy bread and akra. She was barely 2 steps from the vendor when she felt the sharp, shocking burst of water between her legs. For a second, the world stood still. People around panicked. "Shidan Borno," a man shouted. Tiwa crouched, clutching her belly, pain spreading like wildfire. Calls were made. Bystanders gathered. Deji was at a board meeting in Victoria Island when his phone rang. He picked without thinking, and the moment he heard the trembling voice on the other end say, "She's in labor," everything else ceased to exist. He didn't even say goodbye to the meeting. He just grabbed his car keys and ran. The driver didn't move fast enough, so Deji drove himself, speeding through traffic, praying like a man on Judgment Day. "God, don't let anything happen to her, or the baby, please." By the time he got to the clinic, Tiwa was already in the delivery room. He was not allowed in, but he could hear her screams. Each cry tore at him like knives. He paced, unable to sit. Regret pulsed in his veins like poison. A nurse rushed past with blood on her gloves, and he nearly collapsed. An older woman patted his back. "Pray, young man. Your wife will be fine." "Ex-wife," he whispered, correcting her. But even as he said it, his heart rebelled. Deep inside, Tiwa had never left his soul. The doors swung open after hours that felt like lifetimes. A doctor emerged, sweat on his brow, but smiling. "Congratulations, sir. It's a baby girl. They're both okay." Deji fell to his knees, not in celebration, but in relief. A flood of tears soaked his palms as he whispered, "Thank you, thank you." He had lost many things, but this moment reminded him that some miracles still bloom in broken soil. Deji stood beside the hospital bed, staring at the small bundle in Tiwa's arms. The baby girl had Tiwa's nose and his eyes, a quiet miracle wrapped in innocence and soft breath. Tiwa looked weak but peaceful, her body drained yet her spirit strangely calm. She didn't smile when she saw him. Instead, she looked down at the baby and whispered, "She came into this world fighting, just like I had to." Deji took a tentative step forward. "May I hold her?" he asked, his voice cracking. Tiwa didn't answer right away. She studied him, silently weighing his intentions, not as a man, but as a father. Slowly, she nodded. He walked over, hands trembling as she placed the baby gently in his arms. The moment their daughter settled against his chest, Deji's heart cracked wide open. Everything came rushing back. The vows he'd broken, the pain he'd caused, the nights he chose another woman over the one who gave him everything. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the child. "I failed your mother, but I won't fail you." Tiwa turned away. She didn't want to hear apologies now. Her body was still sore, her dignity still healing. And though she appreciated his presence, she didn't forget that he hadn't chosen to stay until after her belly grew and she was washing plates in public. She loved her daughter, yes, but the ache in her heart hadn't disappeared just because Deji finally showed up with diapers and tears. She needed more. Not grand gestures, just consistency. Not promises, just presence. And most importantly, not romance, just responsibility. Word had gotten out. In Lagos, secrets traveled on the wings of gossip faster than Bolt drivers during fuel scarcity. Everyone from Tiwa's compound to Deji's Lekki neighborhood had something to say. The slay queens who envied Cynthia's lifestyle laughed now. So after all her drama, Deji still returned to the same local woman he disgraced. At the buka, customers greeted Tiwa with admiration. "You strong-o. That kind of man for Don finish some women," one lady said. Tiwa smiled politely but said nothing. She didn't live for gossip. She lived for her daughter now. Meanwhile, Cynthia posted subliminal messages online, quotes about betrayal, snakes in human skin, and real queens don't chase clowns. But it didn't matter. Deji no longer replied. He had shut down the affair quietly, choosing instead to be at the clinic daily, holding his child, supporting Tiwa, and learning how to change diapers. One evening, while he held the baby as she slept, Deji asked, "Can I move you to a better place? Somewhere safer?" Tiwa shook her head. "I'll let you help raise her, but I'm not moving into any of your houses. I worked too hard to find peace in this little room." He nodded, ashamed but understanding. What about a joint account for her needs? Education, medical, her future. Tiwa considered it. "Only if I have control," she said. "You've controlled too many things in my life already." Deji didn't argue. He just agreed. It wasn't about control anymore. It was about doing what was right, even if it no longer earned him love. He watched Tiwa rock their daughter back to sleep, and for the first time in years, he realized something. He had once married a queen, but only learned to bow when it was too late. Weeks passed. Tiwa's body healed, and so did parts of her soul, though not in the way Deji had hoped. She didn't move into his mansion. She didn't wear a diamond ring again. She stayed in her humble apartment, surrounded by honest neighbors who had watched her rise from heartbreak with quiet dignity. Deji became a fixture in their lives, not as a lover, but as a father. He arrived every morning to help bathe his daughter, bought formula, paid for a nanny when Tiwa returned to light work at a seamstress shop, and took parenting classes quietly. He never forced reconciliation, even when people told him to do the right thing and marry her again. But Tiwa didn't want another wedding. She wanted her peace. "I'm not rebuilding what we had," she told him one Sunday afternoon as he fed their daughter mashed pawpaw. "I'm building something new for her. For me." Deji nodded. He no longer carried the arrogance of a millionaire. Success had humbled him. He saw that true riches weren't in the contract he signed, but in the tiny fingers that wrapped around his pinky as she cooed in her mother's arms. He offered to buy Tiwa a shop. She declined, but allowed him to pay for their daughter's future. "This is her investment, not mine," she clarified. "Don't confuse generosity with redemption." Those words cut deep, but he understood. He had hurt her in a way love alone could not repair. Some betrayals don't get fairy tale resolutions. They get boundaries. They get growth. They get truth. That was the story of their afterlife. A broken marriage reborn not into romance, but into responsibility. Deji finally understood. Tiwa's strength was never in her silence. It was in her decision to survive without him. At the naming ceremony, a small, modest affair held in the compound yard, neighbors gathered with soft music, plates of jollof, and laughter that didn't feel forced. There was no luxury tent, no fireworks, no press, just love and healing stitched into every fabric tied around the waist of the women who danced with Tiwa. Deji stood in a plain white kaftan, holding his daughter like she was the very breath of his redemption. The baby wore a soft pink dress with her tiny hair wrapped in white lace. When it came time to call the name, all eyes turned to Tiwa. She stood up, smiled gently, and said, "Her name is Iamide, because after pain, joy came." A hush swept the gathering. Even Deji's eyes welled up. He hadn't expected to be moved, but something about that name shattered his pride all over again. When the crowd clapped, Iamide blinked and yawned, resting against her mother's shoulder. Later that night, after everyone had gone, Deji lingered behind. "Thank you for letting me be part of this," he said. Tiwa looked at him. "You earned it through presence, not pity. He nodded, understanding that this was her way of saying, "You may walk beside me, but you no longer lead me." And that was okay. In fact, it was perfect. He kissed Iamide's forehead and whispered, "You saved me, little one." And as he turned to leave, Tiwa stood by the doorway, her silhouette framed in the glow of the moonlight. She wasn't his wife anymore. She was something greater, a woman who rose from betrayal with grace, gave birth in silence, and mothered with fire in her soul. Months turned into a year. Iamide took her first steps, said her first words, and carried her parents into a rhythm of co-parenting that was neither romantic nor hostile. It was peaceful. Deji built a trust fund in her name and continued to show up, not because he was trying to win Tiwa back, but because fatherhood had awakened something human in him. Tiwa expanded her small tailoring work, now sewing uniforms for schools nearby. She still lived modestly, still walked to the market, still carried Iamide on her back with a wrapper tied across her chest. But now, when people saw her, they didn't see the woman who was divorced and abandoned. They saw the woman who overcame. And Deji? He never remarried. He still lived in Lekki, still ran his business. But something about him had changed. He no longer chased appearances. He no longer cared for the noise. He became a man who understood loss and chose to value what remained. Every Sunday, he picked Iamide up and took her to visit his mother. And every Sunday evening, he returned her, sitting with Tiwa on the porch in silence as their daughter slept. No promises, no pressure, just peace. Because sometimes the most powerful love story isn't about getting back together. It's about growing apart without becoming enemies. And for Tiwa, that was her true happy ending. Not the man, not the marriage, but the peace she built from the ruins. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and put on post notifications.